Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Facebook Live. I'm Julia Marvin, and I'm the marketing manager here at Jefferson Center. And today I'm so excited to be joined by Pearson-Vibert. Chelsea is the clinical team lead for Colorado Spirit, which is Jefferson Center's grant-funded mental health and COVID-19 relief program. And so before we get started, a little bit about Colorado Spirit. So it's a community-driven program that's really aimed at providing COVID-19 disaster relief and mental health support here in Jefferson Center, Clear Creek County, and Gilpin County. And what's really great about it is that they're offering free, confidential, and virtual support. The Colorado Spirit team, they're trained crisis counselors, and they're here to listen and, provide support around the feelings that life during the pandemic may bring up, such as worry, sadness, hopelessness, or anger. And so, Chelsea, thanks for joining me today. We're going to be talking a little bit about seasonal affective disorder. And so, we had the time change earlier this week, and I know I have been feeling a little bit of those winter blues already. I think that's usually kind of what we call it, is winter blues, not usually, seasonal affective disorder. And so, Chelsea, thanks for joining us today. To share some helpful tips about how we can keep, the winter blues at bay as the weather gets colder and the days get shorter.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I guess to start with, winter, it's approaching, and for many of us, that does mean that we start to, feel maybe a little bit down or a little bit sad, this kind of seasonal depression that we were talking about. So could you tell us a little bit more about seasonal affective disorder?
Yeah, and so I think, what you had just mentioned, there are the winter blues that I think a lot of people experience. I had read anywhere from 10 to 20% of people tend to experience that particularly in this winter change, but it happens anytime throughout the year. You can also experience when we transition to summer. I would say it's much less common at that time, but it can really happen anytime there's a seasonal change. This one into the winter is particularly hard because we lose the hours in the morning and in the afternoon when our daylight hours just sort of shrink and we're restricted in a lot of ways we can engage. But so seasonal affective disorder, SAD, is different from kind of the typical or expected feelings of sadness or unhappiness. It's a specific type or a subtype of depression related to seasonal changes. It typically presents and starts with younger adults, as well as women tend to be more at risk. And ultimately, it has to do with the changes for this particular time of year. It has to do with the changes in the sunlight we get. As I mentioned, as we get less sunlight, we produce, our circadian rhythm is thrown off, which controls a lot of our hormones. So we have less melatonin, which is how we fall asleep at night because we're not getting that sun changes different, as well as serotonin, the amount in our bodies tend to go down. And serotonin is kind of our feel-good chemical for our body.
Wow,
So, yeah.
I didn't realize there was so much of a physical, component to things. It also sounds like it's one of those things that it's sort of that snowball effect of, we're getting less sunlight. And so, it just impacts all of the different, parts of your life. That's really interesting. Yeah, I was really just thinking of it more of like, it's getting dark at 5 p.m. and it's cold out and I don't want to go outside. And so instead I'm just laying on my couch, eating Cheetos and watching TV all night. But
yes. Well, I think that is such a good point. And it happens to so many people and this is true of all mental health experiences, is it happens in such a wide array, right? There are those times when I look out the window and it's like that cool 50 degrees and I'm cuddled up in my blanket, and my dogs are at my feet. And I'm like, I'm not getting out of bed at all. Like, this is where I'm spending the day. And so sometimes it's that too, and it's still dark. But then there's also kind of that other end of things where it gets dark earlier. Like literally kind of the lights turn off for us hormonally as well. And some of those things just aren't produced at the same rate.
Mm-hmm. So I think you touched on it a little bit, but how is SAD different than regular depression?
Yeah, and so I think it's important to note that depression is its own kind of category, and then seasonal affective disorder is a subtype of major depression. The important characteristics of that is that it is temporal, meaning it happens at a particular time of year. As I mentioned, it isn't just, I would say it's probably most common from this fall into winter change, but it also can happen in the summer. So I think the biggest thing is that it is season-based, and then it also sort of turns, I guess, some of those hormones, once spring comes and we transition back into those hours with the sun, we also see it remit. Whereas depression, you're going to experience that. You will have up and down days, or even sometimes up and down seasons. But truly, it is something that you experienced more days than not, nearly every day, more days than not kind of thing. Whereas seasonal affective is pretty confined to the season in which it happens.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the seasonal affective disorder symptoms to look out for?
Yeah, I'd say specific to seasonal affective, and it's funny you mentioned your experience with the winter blues, because carbs are definitely something that we're going to seek out,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. And I think a lot of people, when I mentioned like, yep, during winter months, we really seek out those carbs, overeating,
comfort food.
yeah, things that I often think when winter hits for us, my husband always wants like shepherd's pie, those like really hearty, heavy meals. So that's one particular symptom, that those big cravings for carbs. As well, there's going to be isolating and social isolation, which I think and how that interacts with COVID and what that kind of looks like is going to be a challenge, I think, for a lot of people. But social isolation, and then the traditional depressive symptoms. So you're not enjoying the things you used to be enjoying, having low energy, just sort of feeling fatigued and really kind of spent. Difficulties with sleep, as I mentioned, with the time change and with the hours of sunlight we're getting reduced, our melatonins, our hormones are sort of thrown off, so that challenges us in the way in which we sleep. It can even be those things where you're waking up multiple times a night or you can't fall asleep. Or early waking is another thing that can happen in sleep-related challenges. Trouble with concentrating, lacking of focus, and all those really traditional things we think with depression. But specifically, carbs are a big thing for seasonal affective, that experience, and the isolation that people do.
Okay. Well, and so you mentioned COVID-19, and so what are your thoughts on obviously we're seeing a pretty big spike in COVID, here in Colorado. The governor's encouraging us to, stay home as much as possible. Again, only interact with people from our own households. And so this is going to be something that's going to be going on for a while longer. And so, how do you think, what do you think about COVID-19 affecting both, SAD, but also, just sort of that general, even if you don't have SAD, like kind of this general depression that some people might be feeling this winter. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think there are sort of, I'll talk about some potential positives first, or maybe some things that we don't get to experience. Is that right now, I think, especially right now, only the United States, but the world, we're all in this same boat together. So there's this new shared experience where you can look sort of left and right, and oftentimes while everyone's in a different boat with different utensils and kind of waging the seas in their own kind of unique space, we all are sort of in the same water in a way, and that we're having these same struggles. So the community you're going to be able to develop online, or my favorite thing is just like looking at memes, which is it's seeing that somebody create something that so accurately reflects this experience that I thought was just me. I thought I was the only one sort of feeling like every day is, Groundhog Day. So I have this opportunity to log online and see that, wow, this experience that feels so isolating and solitary for myself is actually shared by so many people in not just my community here in Colorado, but across the United States and the world at large. I think another really interesting positive, that if once this stay-at-home order sort of kicked into place, for a lot of people, it challenged our coping skills. So you've a lot, for not everyone, but for a lot of people, we've upped the way in which we take care of ourselves. Now I'm working from home, so I have time in the middle of the day to walk with my dog. or I get to cook my meals from home and I get to start maybe a little bit earlier than I would have if I would have been stuck in I-25 traffic. And so for people who've had the opportunity, because it's not always about just wanting to or being able to, but really had an opportunity and been able to invest in that kind of self-care, some of those things are already built in, so they're naturally stronger as we enter into the stalker season. You may have the habit of every time when you wake up, you meditate, or you do yoga before bed. So some of those strategies could be built in and buffered. At the same time, there are a number of challenges that have come with COVID, and then now as we enter into the seasonal change. And truly, I think a lot of it just roots into this culmination of challenges, right? We're isolated more than if, right, if there's snow on the roads, I'm like, I don't want to go out. But now even more so, I'm isolated before that barrier of weather or the barrier of any kind of other challenge comes up. So there's that isolation and the lack of traditional structures. Like I said, some people have had the opportunity and been able to create some better systems, but I know that, right, our kids are going to be home and we're going into a new stage, right? Lockdown stages are slowly creeping back up and it's more restrictive. So the structure that we've created for ourselves, or maybe even what we depended on last winter, like time with friends or having a meal at the same time every day, cultural celebrations. As we enter into the holidays, the way in which you gather as a culture and with your family and your friends is going to likely look radically different. And so all of those things are sort of layers and barriers to accessing some of the things that have made us feel good and kept those winter blues or full-blown seasonal affective disorder at bay. And then another thing was that this idea that for people who have seasonal affective disorder, potentially, there's some research or some dialogue that those symptoms didn't have a remission during the summer, where typically they maybe saw things drop off. Some of those characteristics of isolation and having their depressive symptoms last longer because summer even looked really different, right? Those cultural celebrations, we weren't going to any concerts at Red Rocks, all of the things that maybe used to be built in to sort of bring you back up and re-engage with summer weren't the same. People may not have gotten out and gotten their sunlight or gone on walks. So I think for some people, there's been a carryover of less positive than usual emotional state.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a really great point too, of that. Yeah, even that there's been some longer lasting symptoms because things look different. So as we're heading into winter and the holidays and everything, what are some things that we can be doing to keep that depression or sad at bay?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these things that I'll go through are things that are so great for us any time of year, but they become, we have to be more intentional as we enter into the winter season. So I think one is getting time outside is so important. And I think during COVID as well, maybe it looks different. Maybe you're not going to Wash Park, or maybe you're not going to Red Rocks and getting that hike in. But I think a lot of the recommendation is that first 30 minutes of sunlight, if you're able to get out and greet the sun, that can be huge for, again, hormone production, just feeling good, getting outside, breathing fresh air. So scheduling time outside, and we're working from home, so taking advantage of those opportunities to take your lunch break with your dog or your partners or just yourself and getting time outside. It also promotes vitamin D, which is really great, which actually in Colorado, often we have low vitamin D rates. You'd think we would just be through the roof, but we tend to burn before we get the right amount of vitamin D because we're so close to the sun. So finding access to sunlight is so great. A light, you can find them like on the internet or from local shops, light therapy. So getting a particular kind of light bulb and having some time early in the morning with that light and finding that access, along with waking up early with the sun, is getting a regular sleep schedule. I know that I am always tempted on the weekends or literally any chance I have to sleep in as much as humanly possible. But it is so important to try to set even a 20-minute window where you have really consistent wake up times and go to sleep time. That can be really important. Again, just helping to regulate your hormones and communicate consistently with your body about your need for sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Again, moving your body, so somewhere getting that time outside, but it can even be stuff inside the home, and finding something that works for you, right? I'm not going to like something that you like or vice versa. So finding something that for you gets you out of bed or gets you moving in the middle of the day, whatever's going to be meaningful. If it's yoga, that's great. If it's doing a hit video or something on YouTube, that's one of the great things too, I think, coming out of the pandemic is if you log on to YouTube, I just think that the like exercise internet community has just blown up, which is so great. And there's so many wonderful things you can get free access to, but also really great creators who have things that you can pay for. And so I think finding that access and even plugging back into previous workout communities. I know a lot of studios in Denver have gone online as well, or Colorado as a whole. And so staying as a part of those communities and sticking with those relationships. And then just the general feelings of taking care of yourself. And so we talked about carbs, which if you put me in a sleeve of Oreos any time of year, I'll work my way through. But thinking about these winter months, having complex carbohydrates are really great. So those root vegetables, and it's so interesting, right? Thinking about the foods that we have traditionally around Thanksgiving, how carb heavy they are and how much the root vegetables are a key feature of those meals. These are something that for a long time root vegetables are around in the winter. Our bodies are sort of built to be in that space during this time, and like it's been replaced ultimately by Cheetos and Oreos. But getting back to those roots of complex carbohydrates, so those root vegetables, whole grains, things like that, good fats, avocado, coconut oil, accessing those things can be huge. Getting things done on your to-do list. So being intentional about the way you use your time. I have a little calendar and I sort of keep track of figuring out the ways in which I waste my time, like refreshing my Facebook or looking through Twitter for the 100th time. And so really kind of being intentional about the way in which you schedule your day and the things that you want to get done, because nothing is going to, there are a lot of things that can boost your mood, but some things that are really great about boosting your mood are doing things that make you feel better. And so often I get bogged down with details, but really it's scheduling things that are going to make you feel good, and accomplishing those things are what's great, right? If we sit and wait for the motivation to do that yoga video, if you're in the experience of sad or you have just the winter blues, oftentimes that motivation will not be there. That is a key feature of that diagnosis with major depression. So finding a way to put it into your schedule and build up that strength independent of the motivation is really going to make a big difference. And then another one is creating your bubble. So when we think about that social connection, if I know that my husband and I and our neighbors are doing all of the same things in terms of the way in which we protect ourselves, they're probably a good person to connect with and have community with, because we are in a bubble where we're all being safe at the same rate and we're making similar choices related to COVID. And I know that can make a really big difference. And also, last one is that therapy and medication are two really great options. So if at any point you feel like, this list is great and there are things that for some people it's easy to access and they can access them regularly, but for some people they're not. So obviously anytime you feel like this is too much, speaking with Jefferson Center, coming and speaking with our organization or whichever mental health provider you seek, and talking potentially about getting on some antidepressants make a huge difference. And this idea that if it is seasonal affective disorder, that the time can be short-lived, where maybe it's a medication you take through the winter and you taper off and you partner with your psychiatrist about what's going to be the best option for you. It's something that you look into engaging in all year. And same with therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy has lots of evidence with seasonal affective disorders, so engaging with a therapist in that space or whatever modality you prefer. But yeah.
Well, and I think that's a good point too. It's, you those are so many great suggestions, and it sounds like it's not a one size fits all. So, what works for one person, one person might find that, really focusing on their nutrition and meal prepping and making sure that they're doing that, maybe that's enough to help. Somebody else might find that, having that, getting really into a physical activity that you do every day, maybe that's what helps. And to your point, like, that it's okay too to be like, no, I need help, I need therapy, and I need medication, and that's what I need to help with that. And so, that there's a lot of different ways to, help with it, and that it's all very individual. So I think that's a really great thing to note as well. So, okay, so it sounds like there's a lot we can do, and hopefully, a lot of it is it sounds like some of the stuff, it's, things that have been helpful during this whole pandemic of, making sure we're active and we're getting outside, and, that we're routines. I know that's something that we've talked about a lot here at Jefferson Center, on our social media and things like these Facebook Lives, is the importance of building routines, and that, they can be big, they can be small, but that they can really help you, kind of have some of that control over your day and what's going on, especially when everything else is a little bit uncertain. But I really liked your point about the to-do list. That's not something I would have thought of, but that's a great, it's true that when I make a list, even if it's got small things on it, like, make sure to drink enough water today, drink, 3 water bottles of water today, even doing that, like being able to, something that's really easy, but that reminder, and like you were saying, like kind of detaching it from like, oh, I should do this, and that motivation, but making it different. There is a sense that accomplishment at the end of the day when you're able to cross things off your list is, definitely a mood booster. So that's a really great idea. That's one I think I'll, definitely take from this. So, so talking a little bit about, you mentioned like, when you need to get help. So how can Colorado Spirit and Jefferson Center, how can you help individuals who might be experiencing SAD, or, how do you know if it's SAD versus, just regular depression? I'm thinking that's probably something that you need to talk with somebody about. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the baseline for most things is it's always great to talk to somebody, especially a professional with Jefferson Center. We have people on standby at all times to connect with you if you have questions like that, because I don't think it's something that we can just sort of sit and assess ourselves and be like, yep, this is what I have, and this is just my fate. So really connecting with somebody with Jefferson Center, to have this conversation, because I think it's important that people trust your body. You know what's going on, and if you think this is out of normal for you, this isn't a traditional experience you have every winter, or if this is, or maybe it's the opposite, maybe this is something that happens to you every early November. You notice that your mood slips, and the way in which you engage with your community and your life just isn't the same as it has been. So even if it's a new thing, or if it's something that you're noticing, always feel free to check into the center. I think that if your life is looking different mental health wise than how it has been traditionally, that's a great time to seek out some extra support. In terms of Colorado Spirit, so our program focuses primarily on people impacted by COVID, but as I have been speaking to, we're definitely going to
I
see.
think we're all a little bit.
Yes,
I think we're all affected by it. So you're helping everyone.
Everyone, yes, that has been the discussion so far. That like every single person, right? And I think that it's even if you you feel maybe you live in a really rural area where your life traditionally looks the same, because the way in which you engage in your community anyways wasn't a lot of in-person connection. I mean, things are just so different. And so where our group sort of steps in is that we, similar to, right, we sort of ran through this list, and if you're thinking like, I don't know that I need a traditional therapist. I don't need someone who's going to be able to meet with me bi-weekly or even once a month. I just want somebody to walk through some of this problem solving. I know this list, right? There's thousands, similar to that there's been so many exercise related communities developed. There's been very similar things done in the mental health space. There are wonderful YouTube videos, wonderful articles from all points of the globe that people can access. And if you're like, I've read a lot of these articles, but in applying it to my life, I haven't been able to make that connection. That's a wonderful time where you're like, I'm not quite here, but I'm definitely not doing well. That's a beautiful space that I think our team is able to step into and help provide those 1 or 2 conversations, working on a deep dive about practically taking care of yourself, taking care of your community. I think I see us doing that. But then also, if you have a group of people or an organization where you'd like, hey, I'd love for you to come talk on just mental health, taking care of yourself, or what it looks like for, if we're a group of people who works with community members and we see our community members struggling and, we're at a loss. We don't work in mental health. We do, we're a food bank, or we traditionally work with, just kids it's a play space for kids. We would love to come into your world and help create some kind of dialogue with your staff or with your consumers around taking care of themselves, how to better communicate and build relationships, or anything of that nature.
Yeah, I think that dialogue is so important because like we've talked about, like COVID is impacting a lot of people's mental health, and a lot of times maybe it's not something that anxiety or depression or things like that might not have been things that you experienced before, but they've just been brought on by COVID. And so if you don't have that experience, it's helpful to to have somebody come in and talk about things. And I love what you said about, you being there for kind of that gray area where you're like, well, I don't really I'm not feeling like I need, to talk to somebody every single week, but I'm not feeling okay. Like, I know that I'm not feeling okay. And I think that's really great that your team is there, to talk with people and to kind of walk through that and what that looks like, and kind of help with that, discovery of what you can do to feel better. And I think that's so important. So that's really great. Okay, so we're running out of time here. So one last question for you. What's the one thing that you would want people to know, or that maybe we haven't talked about but you think is really important?
Yeah, I think just this specific idea that you're not alone, especially when it comes to your experience during the pandemic, and now with this new seasonal edition. Truly, anyone who lives in the northern half of the world, and in those northern latitudes, this is hard.
Mhm.
You're not doing anything wrong. You're not this is just hard. And
Mhm.
so lean on your community, find a way to lean on us at Jefferson Center with the Colorado Spirit team, because you're not alone and you don't have to do this alone.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's such a great point, Chelsea. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and to give all this helpful information. And for those of you who are watching this video after it's over, feel free to message us here on Facebook and we'll get back to you. And also, just remember that no matter what you're feeling, you're not alone. Colorado Spirit and Jefferson Center are always here for you. You can give the Colorado Spirit team a call at 720-731-4689 if you want to talk, or just get in touch. And so I think that's it for today. Chelsea, again, thank you. Thanks everybody, and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks.